Park Seung-woo had 3 unbreakable rules that kept him alive in Seoul's criminal underworld. Never show mercy, never trust foreigners, and never, under any circumstances, let a black woman near his empire. But when his grandmother threatened to dismantle his billion-won inheritance and hand it to his yoga instructor cousin unless he survived one blind date, he realized that dodging bullets was easier than confronting his own hatred. The woman who walked into that restaurant carrying Tupperware, wearing African print like armor, and meeting his contempt with unwavering eyes, didn't just break his rules. She dismantled his entire world, one fearless truth at a time. Welcome to the channel. I want to know, what country or city are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Park Seung-woo's driver knew better than to speak during the 20-minute drive to his grandmother's estate in Pyeongchang-dong. The silence suited Seung-woo fine. He had 3 territories to consolidate by Friday, a smuggling route through Incheon that needed cleaning, and a persistent problem named Lee Jae-hyun who kept testing boundaries in Gangnam. His grandmother's monthly summons were the only interruptions he tolerated to his empire's momentum, and even those he attended with armed men stationed outside her gates. The traditional hanek sat behind walls that had witnessed 70 years of family secrets, money that smelled like blood, and decisions that shaped Seoul's underworld. Seung-woo's Italian leather shoes made no sound on the stone pathway. His grandmother's housemaid bowed deeply, her face carefully blank as she always was around him, and gestured toward the tea room. Mrs. Park Myung, he sat with her back straight as rebar, her silver hair pulled into an immaculate bun, wearing a dove-gray hanbok that probably cost more than most people's cars. At 78, she commanded more fear in certain circles than her grandson ever would. She had built the foundation he now ruled, back when women weren't supposed to build anything except families and reputations. Grandmother. Seung-woo bowed with practiced precision, the kind that showed respect without revealing softness. Sit. Her voice carried the weight of decades giving orders that were never questioned. She poured him tea with steady hands, her rings catching the afternoon light streaming through the rice paper windows. You look thin. I'm busy. Busy making enemies or busy counting money you'll never spend. Seung-woo accepted the tea but didn't drink. His grandmother's small talk always preceded larger strikes. Both require equal attention. She smiled then, the kind that made his instincts prickle. I've made a decision about my will. The room temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees. Seung-woo's expression remained carved from stone, but his mind raced through calculations. His grandmother controlled the original assets, the legitimate businesses that cleaned everything else, the properties that made his entire operation possible. Without her infrastructure, he was just another thug with delusions. I'm transferring everything to Min-jun. Seung-woo's cousin. The yoga instructor. The man who sold crystals at a farmer's market in Hongdae and spoke unironically about chakra alignment. The man who had never made a difficult decision in his privileged life. You're joking. Seung-woo's voice came out flat, dangerous. Do I look like I'm joking? Mrs. Park sipped her tea, utterly serene. Min-jun may sell overpriced rocks to foreigners, but at least he smiles. At least he hasn't turned his heart into a morgue. Min-jun couldn't run a lemonade stand without getting robbed. Seung-woo set his cup down with controlled force. This empire requires strength. This empire requires a future, and you refuse to provide one. His grandmother's eyes, still sharp as broken glass, fixed on him. You're 35 years old. You trust no one. You feel nothing. You've built walls so high you'll die alone inside them, and I won't watch it happen. My personal life is irrelevant to business. Your personal life is non-existent, which makes you a liability. She leaned forward slightly. A man with nothing to lose is dangerous. A man with nothing to live for is already dead. Seung-woo felt anger rising in his chest, the kind he usually reserved for people who stole from him. If this is about marriage, this is about you remembering you're human. Mrs. Park pulled a photograph from her sleeve and placed it on the table between them. I'm offering you a choice. Go on one blind date with this woman. If you complete the evening without running, I'll leave everything as planned. And if I refuse, Min-jun gets his inheritance early. I'm sure he'll enjoy converting your assets into a wellness center. Seung-woo stared at the photograph but didn't touch it. He could see enough. A woman. Young. Smiling. And unmistakably, undeniably black. The anger transformed into something colder, sharper. No. No. His grandmother's eyebrow raised a fraction. You've lost your mind. Seung-woo stood, his chair scraping against the polished floor. I don't know what game this is, but I'm not playing. Sit down. I will not be seen with, he caught himself, but his grandmother's expression told him she'd heard the words he'd swallowed. With what, Seung-woo? Say it clearly. This is a setup. You're trying to humiliate me. Park Seung-woo had 3 unbreakable rules that kept him alive in Seoul's criminal underworld. Never show mercy, never trust foreigners, and never, under any circumstances, let a black woman near his empire. But when his grandmother threatened to dismantle his $1 billion inheritance and hand it to his yoga instructor cousin unless he survived one blind date, he realized that dodging bullets was easier than confronting his own hatred. The woman who walked into that restaurant carrying Tupperware, wearing African print-like armor, and meeting his contempt with unwavering eyes, didn't just break his rules. She dismantled his entire world, one fearless truth at a time. Welcome to the channel. I want to know, what country or city are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Park Seung-woo's driver knew better than to speak during the 20-minute drive to his grandmother's estate in Pyeongchang-dong. The silence suited Seung-woo fine. He had 3 territories to consolidate by Friday, a smuggling route through Incheon that needed cleaning, and a persistent problem named Lee Jae-hyun who kept testing boundaries in Gangnam. His grandmother's monthly summons were the only interruptions he tolerated to his empire's momentum, and even those he attended with armed men stationed outside her gates. The traditional hanek sat behind walls that had witnessed 70 years of family secrets, money that smelled like blood, and decisions that shaped Seoul's underworld. Seung-woo's Italian leather shoes made no sound on the stone pathway. His grandmother's housemaid bowed deeply, her face carefully blank as she always was around him, and gestured toward the tea room. Mrs. Park Myung, he sat with her back straight as rebar, her silver hair pulled into an immaculate bun, wearing a dove-gray hanbok that probably cost more than most people's cars. At 78, she commanded more fear in certain circles than her grandson ever would. She had built the foundation he now ruled, back when women weren't supposed to build anything except families and reputations. Grandmother. Seung-woo bowed with practiced precision, the kind that showed respect without revealing softness. Sit. Her voice carried the weight of decades, giving orders that were never questioned. She poured him tea with steady hands, her rings catching the afternoon light streaming through the rice paper windows. You look thin. I'm busy. Busy making enemies or busy counting money you'll never spend. Seung-woo accepted the tea but didn't drink. His grandmother's small talk always preceded larger strikes. Both require equal attention. She smiled then, the kind that made his instincts prickle. I've made a decision about my will. The room temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees. Seung-woo's expression remained carved from stone, but his mind raced through calculations. His grandmother controlled the original assets, the legitimate businesses that cleaned everything else, the properties that made his entire operation possible. Without her infrastructure, he was just another thug with delusions. I'm transferring everything to Min-jun, Seung-woo's cousin, the yoga instructor, the man who sold crystals at a farmer's market in Hongdae and spoke unironically about chakra alignment, the man who had never made a difficult decision in his privileged life. You're joking. Seung-woo's voice came out flat, dangerous. Do I look like I'm joking? Mrs. Park sipped her tea, utterly serene. Min-jun may sell overpriced rocks to foreigners, but at least he smiles. At least he hasn't turned his heart into a morgue. Min-jun couldn't run a lemonade stand without getting robbed. Seung-woo set his cup down with controlled force. This empire requires strength. This empire requires a future, and you refuse to provide one. His grandmother's eyes, still sharp as broken glass, fixed on him. You're 35 years old. You trust no one. You feel nothing. You've built walls so high you'll die alone inside them, and I won't watch it happen. My personal life is irrelevant to business. Your personal life is non-existent, which makes you a liability. She leaned forward slightly. A man with nothing to lose is dangerous. A man with nothing to live for is already dead. Seung-woo felt anger rising in his chest, the kind he usually reserved for people who stole from him. If this is about marriage, this is about you remembering you're human. Mrs. Park pulled a photograph from her sleeve and placed it on the table between them. I'm offering you a choice. Go on one blind date with this woman. If you complete the evening without running, I'll leave everything as planned. And if I refuse? Min-jun gets his inheritance early. I'm sure he'll enjoy converting your assets into a wellness center. Seung-woo stared at the photograph but didn't touch it. He could see enough. A woman. Young. Smiling. And unmistakably, undeniably black. The anger transformed into something colder, sharper. No. No. His grandmother's eyebrow raised a fraction. You've lost your mind. Seung-woo stood, his chair scraping against the polished floor. I don't know what game this is, but I'm not playing. Sit down. I will not be seen with. He caught himself, but his grandmother's expression told him she'd heard the words he'd swallowed. With what, Seung-woo? Say it clearly. This is a setup. You're trying to humiliate me. Park Seung-woo had 3 unbreakable rules that kept him alive in Seoul's criminal underworld. Never show mercy, never trust foreigners, and never, under any circumstances, let a black woman near his empire. But when his grandmother threatened to dismantle his billion-won inheritance and hand it to his yoga instructor cousin unless he survived one blind date, he realized that dodging bullets was easier than confronting his own hatred. The woman who walked into that restaurant carrying Tupperware, wearing African print like armor, and meeting his contempt with unwavering eyes, didn't just break his rules. She dismantled his entire world, one fearless truth at a time. Welcome to the channel. I want to know, what country or city are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Mrs. Park's call came on Friday evening, just as Aaliyah was closing the restaurant's books and contemplating whether she had the energy to do anything besides collapse into her apartment and watch cooking shows until her brain shut down. She almost didn't answer the unfamiliar number, but something made her thumb hover over the accept button before pressing it. Aaliyah Brooks speaking. Aaliyah, it's Mrs. Park. The voice was warm but carried an undertone that suggested this wasn't a social call. I hope I'm not interrupting. Just finishing up for the night. Aaliyah leaned back in her office chair, surrounded by invoices and inventory lists. Is everything all right? You left rather mysteriously yesterday. Everything is perfect, which is why I'm calling. A pause, the kind that preceded important revelations. I wasn't entirely truthful with you about why I've been visiting your restaurant these past 6 months. Aaliyah felt her instincts prickle. Go on. I've been observing you. Your character, your strength, how you handle adversity with grace and fire. I've watched you face this city's small cruelties without becoming cruel yourself. I've seen you build something extraordinary through sheer force of will and talent. Mrs. Park's tone shifted, became almost conspiratorial. And I've decided you're perfect for my grandson. The silence stretched for 3 full seconds while Aaliyah's brain processed what she'd just heard. I'm sorry, what? I'd like you to go on a blind date with him. Tomorrow night. 8 o'clock at Mingle's in Gangnam. Aaliyah laughed, the sound sharp with disbelief. Mrs. Park, I appreciate your confidence in me, but I don't do blind dates. Especially not ones that come with 6 months of surveillance. It wasn't surveillance. It was due diligence. The older woman's voice remained calm, reasonable, as if this were a perfectly normal conversation. My grandson is brilliant, powerful, and completely trapped inside walls he built from fear and his father's poison. He needs someone who won't bow to him, won't shrink from him, and won't tolerate his worst impulses. That sounds like a job for a therapist, not a date. Therapists require the patient to want help. Seung-woo doesn't know he needs saving. Mrs. Park sighed, and for the first time, she sounded tired. I'm going to be honest with you, Aaliyah, because you deserve honesty and because I think lies would insult us both. Aaliyah sat up straighter, her hand gripping the phone tighter. I'm listening. My grandson has some very ugly views. About foreigners. About people who don't look like him. About you specifically, though he's never met you. The words landed like stones in still water. His father raised him to believe that Korean blood is sacred, that outsiders threaten everything we've built, and that black people in particular are beneath our consideration. The anger came fast and hot, flooding through Aaliyah's chest. And you want me to have dinner with a racist? Are you out of your mind? I want you to have dinner with a man who's been fed racism like it was mother's milk, but who isn't beyond redemption. Mrs. Park's voice turned steel underneath silk. I'm not excusing him. I'm not asking you to fix him. I'm asking you to show him that everything his father taught him was a lie, simply by being exactly who you are. Why would I do that? Why would I subject myself to someone's bigotry for your family project? Aaliyah stood, pacing her small office. I deal with enough casual racism running this restaurant. I don't need to schedule more of it into my personal life. Because I'm offering you 100 million won if you complete the date. Aaliyah stopped pacing. 100 million won was roughly $75,000. That was 6 months of rent. New kitchen equipment. The expansion she'd been dreaming about. That's a lot of money to throw at a stranger. You're not a stranger. I've spent 6 months learning who you are. Mrs. Park's voice softened slightly. And it's not about the money, not really. I'm leveraging his inheritance to force this meeting. He goes on this date or he loses everything I've built. But I'm offering you payment because your time and emotional labor have value, and I won't pretend otherwise. Aaliyah sat back down, her mind racing through the implications. He doesn't know I'm black, does he? He knows. He's seen your photograph. He nearly walked out of my house in a rage. A pause. But he'll show up tomorrow because he's a survivor, and survivors make practical choices even when they hate them. So I'm supposed to sit across from a man who hates me for existing and what? Hope he has an epiphany between appetizers and dessert. I'm asking you to be yourself. Nothing more, nothing less. Mrs. Park's conviction rang through the phone. Seung-woo has never met someone like you. Someone who stands in their truth without apology. Someone who faces hatred and doesn't absorb it, doesn't reflect it back, but simply refuses to be diminished by it. You're asking me to be a teaching moment. I'm asking you to be a mirror. What he sees in it is his choice. The older woman exhaled slowly. I won't lie to you, Aaliyah. This might be uncomfortable. He might say things that hurt. But I have to believe, that underneath all that armor and ugliness is the boy I raised before his father ruined him. Aaliyah walked to her office window, looking out at Itaewon's neon-lit streets. She thought about every side-eye she'd gotten in this city, every microaggression, every person who'd assumed she was less than because of her skin. She thought about the exhaustion of being strong all the time, of turning the other cheek until her neck hurt from turning. What makes you think I'm strong enough for this? Because you're still here. Because you built a restaurant that serves soul food with kimchi to Koreans who didn't know they needed it. Because you face this city every day and choose love over bitterness. Mrs. Park's voice carried absolute certainty. Because if anyone can show my grandson that his hate is smaller than humanity's capacity for connection, it's you. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything Aaliyah wasn't saying. The rational part of her brain screamed to hang up, to tell this elegant woman and her damaged grandson to solve their own family dysfunction. But another part, the part that had dragged her across an ocean to build something beautiful in a foreign land, whispered that maybe this mattered. If he disrespects me, I'm walking out. Money or no money. I would expect nothing less. And I'm wearing whatever I want. If he has a problem with my existence, he can choke on it while looking at African print. Mrs. Park laughed, genuine and delighted. Perfect. I'll text you the details. Thank you, Aaliyah, for your courage and your grace. After she hung up, Aaliyah sat in her quiet office for a long time, wondering what she'd just agreed to and whether Mrs. Park's faith in her was a gift or a burden she wasn't ready to carry. Her phone buzzed with a text, the restaurant name, the time, and a single line that made her smile despite everything. He needs you more than you need him. Remember that. Aaliyah looked at her reflection in the darkened window, seeing the woman who'd survived everything Seoul had thrown at her and come out stronger. Tomorrow night, she'd walk into that restaurant as herself, unapologetically black, undeniably excellent, and absolutely unwilling to shrink. Let Park Seung-woo try to hate that. Seung-woo arrived at Mingle's 30 minutes early, which gave him time to position his men strategically throughout the restaurant and mentally prepare for what he decided would be the most excruciating 3 hours of his life. He'd made the reservation under a false name, paid the owner enough to ensure the entire second floor remained empty except for his table, and instructed his driver to keep the car running in case he needed a tactical retreat. The private dining room overlooked Seoul's glittering skyline, all floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist elegance that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a year. Seung-woo sat with his back to the wall, as always, wearing a black suit that had been tailored in Milan and cost enough to fund a small business. His rings caught the low lighting, each one a statement of power earned through violence and strategy. He checked his watch. 7:58. His jaw clenched so hard it ached. This was his grandmother's fault. His dead father's fault for not teaching her the importance of bloodline purity. His own fault for not seeing this ambush coming. The photo sat in his jacket pocket, and he'd looked at it exactly once since leaving his grandmother's house, just long enough to confirm that yes, the woman was exactly what he'd thought. An outsider, an American, and black. The host appeared at exactly 8 o'clock, bowing deeply. "Mr. Park, your guest has arrived." Seung-woo straightened in his chair, his expression settling into the cold mask he wore when negotiating with people he didn't respect. He expected her to be late, flustered, probably overdressed in some desperate attempt to impress him. He expected submission disguised as confidence, the kind of performance people put on when they knew they were out of their depth. What walked through the door obliterated every single expectation. Aaliyah Brooks moved like she owned not just the room but the entire building, the city outside, possibly the universe. She wore a hanbok that made Seung-woo's brain short-circuit trying to process it. The traditional Korean silhouette was unmistakable, the fit perfect, but the fabric was an explosion of color that seemed to vibrate with life. Vibrant African wax print in bold geometric patterns, blues and reds and golds that shouldn't work together but somehow created something magnificent. The jaggery wrapped perfectly across her chest, tied with a crimson ribbon, while the chima flowed around her legs like controlled fire. Her dark skin glowed against the colors. Her hair was styled in elegant braids that fell past her shoulders. And she carried, without any apparent irony, a Tupperware container that looked like it belonged at a church potluck, not a Michelin-starred restaurant. Seung-woo felt his face twist into something between shock and disgust before he could control it. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Her eyes, sharp, intelligent, missing nothing, landed on him and held steady. "You must be Park Seung-woo." Her Korean was flawless, Seoul dialect with just a hint of warmth that native speakers often lacked. She didn't bow. Didn't even dip her head in polite acknowledgement. Just stood there, meeting his stare with the kind of confidence that suggested she'd already sized him up and found him wanting. "You're late." It was a lie, but he needed to establish dominance immediately. "I'm exactly on time. Your watch is 3 minutes fast." She moved to the table, set down her Tupperware with deliberate care, and settled into the chair across from him with the grace of someone who'd never questioned her right to occupy space. "Should we get the awkwardness out of the way now, or would you prefer to simmer in your discomfort for a while first?" Seung-woo blinked. Nobody spoke to him like this. Ever. "Excuse me. Your face when I walked in looked like you'd swallowed glass. I'm trying to decide if that's because I'm black, because I'm American, or because this hanbok threatens your narrow definition of what Korean culture is allowed to be." She folded her hands on the table, her expression pleasant, almost friendly. "I'm betting all 3. Heat crawled up his neck. "You have no idea who you're talking to." "I know exactly who I'm talking to. Your grandmother was very thorough." Aaliyah tilted her head slightly, studying him like he was a particularly interesting specimen. "Park Seung-woo, 35. Runs half of Seoul's underground economy through a combination of inherited assets and ruthless territorial expansion. Known for never showing mercy, never trusting outsiders, and having the emotional range of a morgue drawer." She paused. "She also mentioned you're a racist, but I figured I'd confirm that firsthand." Seung-woo's hand curled into a fist under the table. "My grandmother had no right to arrange this. And yet here you are, sitting across from me, because apparently your inheritance means more than your principles." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "That must sting. This is not going to work." He started to stand. "Sit down." Her voice didn't rise, didn't sharpen, but something in it made him pause. "You want to walk out? Fine. Lose everything your family built because you can't tolerate 3 hours in my presence. But don't pretend it's about principle. Call it what it is. Cowardice." "I am not a coward." The words came out hard, dangerous. "Then prove it. Sit." Aaliyah opened her Tupperware, and the smell of cheese and spices filled the space between them. I brought mac and cheese, smoked Gouda, sharp cheddar, and a touch of gochugaru because I figured if I'm going to make this excruciating for both of us, we might as well eat something good. Seung-woo stared at her, his mind racing through options. He could leave. He could call his grandmother and tell her to go to hell. He could have his men escort this woman out and pretend this never happened. But she was right about one thing. Walking away would cost him everything. He sat back down, slowly, his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. Good choice. Aaliyah pushed the Tupperware toward the center of the table. Now, let's establish some ground rules. You can hate me silently, or you can hate me out loud. But if you hate me out loud, I get to respond, and I promise you're not going to enjoy the conversation. I don't hate you. The lie tasted like ash. Yes, you do. You hate what I represent. You hate that I exist in your space, wearing your culture mixed with mine, refusing to apologize for breathing your air. She picked up her chopsticks, perfectly at ease. What you haven't figured out yet is that your hate is your problem, not mine. A server appeared, nervous, holding menus with shaking hands. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Seung-woo ordered wine without looking at the list, something expensive and red that he hoped would make this entire evening blur into forgettable noise. Aaliyah ordered water and kimchi, then looked at him expectantly. What? He snapped. You're staring at my hanbok like it personally offended your ancestors. It's inappropriate. It's brilliant. She smoothed the fabric with obvious pride. A friend in Dong Demon made it for me. She said if I was going to wear hanbok, I should wear it as myself, not as an imitation of something I'm not. Her eyes locked onto his. You know what's actually inappropriate? Sitting across from someone and radiating disgust like it's a personality trait. Seung-woo felt something crack inside his carefully maintained control. This woman, this infuriating, impossible woman, wasn't playing by any rules he understood. She should be intimidated. She should be trying to win him over, to prove herself worthy of his time. Instead, she sat there in her audacious dress, offering him mac and cheese, and looking at him like he was the one who needed to prove something. Why did you agree to this? He asked finally, genuinely curious despite himself. Aaliyah's smile turned sharp. Your grandmother offered me money. A lot of it. And I figured if I'm going to deal with racism anyway, I might as well get paid for it. She leaned forward slightly. But between you and me, I'm also curious to see if there's anything human underneath all that expensive cologne and performative contempt. You won't find it. We'll see. She picked up a fork, took a bite of her mac and cheese, and closed her eyes briefly in satisfaction. 3 hours. Park Seung-woo. Try not to make them all miserable. He watched her eat, watched the way she inhabited her skin without apology, and felt something uncomfortable stirring beneath his anger, something that felt dangerously close to fascination. The server retreated after delivering their drinks, practically running from the tension that crackled between them like static electricity before a lightning strike. Aaliyah took a sip of water, set the glass down with deliberate precision, and leaned back in her chair with the posture of someone settling in for an important conversation. So let's talk about it, she said, her voice calm, almost conversational. Why do you hate black women? Seung-woo choked on his wine. Actually choked, coughing into his fist while his eyes watered. What? You heard me. Aaliyah's expression remained pleasantly neutral, as if she'd asked about the weather. We're going to be sitting here for the next few hours, and I'd rather not spend them drowning in your barely concealed contempt. So let's be honest. Why do you specifically hate black women? I don't. He stopped, recalibrated. That's an inappropriate question. Is it more inappropriate than the way you looked at me when I walked in? Like I was something you'd scraped off your shoe. She tilted her head, genuinely curious. I'm giving you a chance to explain yourself. Most people don't get that courtesy. Seung-woo gripped his wine glass hard enough that his knuckles whitened. Nobody had ever put him on the spot like this, demanded he justify beliefs he'd absorbed so thoroughly they felt like truth rather than choice. You wouldn't understand. Try me. The silence stretched between them. Part of him wanted to stand up and walk out. Inheritance be damned. But another part, the part that had kept him alive through gang wars and territory disputes, recognized that this woman was dangerous in ways his usual enemies weren't. She fought with words that cut deeper than knives. It's about preservation, he said finally, the words stiff and rehearsed, like he was reciting a lesson learned too young. Korean culture is ancient, pure. We've survived invasions, colonization, division. Maintaining that purity isn't hate, it's survival. Aaliyah's eyebrow rose a fraction. And I threaten that purity how, exactly? Outsiders dilute what we've built. What we are. He met her eyes, challenging. You're not Korean. You can't understand the weight of that history. You're right. I'm not Korean. She picked up her chopsticks, perfectly at ease. I'm descended from people who were stolen from their homes, sold like livestock, worked to death building a country that refused to recognize their humanity for centuries. Talk to me about the weight of history, Park Seung-woo. I'll wait. The words landed like a slap. Seung-woo felt heat crawl up his neck. That's different. How? She cut him off, her voice still calm but edged with steel now. Because your suffering is sacred and mine is just inconvenient? Because Korean pain matters and black pain is just background noise. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Aaliyah set down her chopsticks. Let me ask you something else. This purity you're so concerned about preserving, does it feed anyone? Does it heal anyone? Or is it just a pretty word for the fear that if you let people like me get too close, you might have to acknowledge we're human too? You're twisting my words. I'm clarifying your meaning. She leaned forward slightly. You said outsiders dilute Korean culture. But I run a restaurant in Itaewon that serves Korean flavors alongside my grandmother's Alabama recipes. My customers, most of them Korean, line up around the block because food is a language of connection, not division. So tell me, am I diluting your culture, or am I celebrating it in ways your narrow definition won't allow? Seung-woo opened his mouth, then closed it. His father's voice echoed in his head, warnings about foreign contamination, about the necessity of keeping bloodlines clean. But sitting across from this woman who wore Korean and African heritage like intertwined armor, those warnings suddenly sounded hollow. You're one person, he said, grasping for solid ground. An exception. An exception. Aaliyah laughed, sharp and humorless. How convenient. When I succeed, I'm an exception. When someone who looks like me fails, they're proof of your prejudice. That's not logic, that's just lazy racism with a bow on it. I am not racist. The words came out too loud, defensive. Really? She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen a few times, and turned it toward him. Your grandmother told me you said, and I quote, I will not be seen with that kind of woman. Want to explain what that kind means if not racist? Seung-woo stared at the phone screen, at his own words reflected back at him, and felt something crumble inside his carefully constructed worldview. You don't understand the context. Then give me context that makes those words sound better. I'll wait. Aaliyah pocketed her phone and picked up a fork, taking another bite of mac and cheese as if they were discussing the menu rather than dismantling his entire belief system. He tried a different angle. Black culture and Korean culture are fundamentally incompatible. Based on what evidence? Based on, he faltered, history, values, the way we organize society. So you're saying Korean values include what? Hard work, family loyalty, respect for elders, educational achievement. Aaliyah counted them off on her fingers. Because those are also black values. My grandmother raised me to work twice as hard to get half as far. To honor my elders. To value education as the ladder out of poverty. She paused. Maybe the problem isn't that our cultures are incompatible. Maybe the problem is you've never actually tried to understand mine. I don't need to understand. There it is. She pointed her fork at him like a weapon. You don't need to understand because understanding might require you to change, and change is terrifying. It's easier to hate from a distance than to risk discovering your father was wrong. The mention of his father made Seung-woo's hands curl into fists. Leave my father out of this. Why? He's the one who taught you this poison, isn't he? Aaliyah's voice softened slightly, not with pity but with something closer to recognition. Your grandmother told me. He raised you to believe that Korean blood was sacred and everything else was contamination. But he's dead, and you're still letting him control you. You know nothing about my father. I know men like your father. Aaliyah met his eyes steadily. Men who hoard their pain like currency and spend it on teaching the next generation to hate. Men who mistake cruelty for strength and isolation for purity. She paused. I also know their children, the ones still trying to earn approval from ghosts. Seung-woo felt something break loose in his chest, something that tasted like rage and grief mixed together. You have no right. I have every right. Her voice remained level, implacable. You're sitting here hating me for existing, and I'm supposed to be polite about it? I'm supposed to make you comfortable while you decide whether I'm human enough to deserve basic respect. She shook her head. That's not how this works. Then how does it work? The question came out ragged, almost desperate. Aaliyah studied him for a long moment, and he had the uncomfortable feeling she was seeing past his expensive suit and his carefully maintained control to something raw underneath. You stop hiding behind your father's fear and start thinking for yourself. She pushed the Tupperware toward him. You taste the mac and cheese I brought. You notice that Korean gochugaru and black soul food create something better together than they do apart. And you ask yourself why that threatens you. Seung-woo looked at the container, at the food that represented everything his father had taught him to reject. His hand moved before his brain could stop it, picking up a fork, taking a bite that felt like betrayal and revelation at the same time. The flavors hit his tongue, creamy, spicy, complex, perfect. Exactly like the woman who'd made it. Exactly like everything he'd been taught to fear. He swallowed, and it felt like swallowing his father's lies along with the cheese. Aaliyah watched him, her expression unreadable. Well, it's good, he admitted, the words quiet, almost ashamed. I know. She smiled, sad and knowing. That's what scares you most. If you are still listening and feel this story touching something inside you, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, to like and share this video so we can continue bringing heartfelt stories every day. And if it isn't too much to ask, would you tell me where you're watching from? Leave a comment below and let us know which corner of the world this story has reached. We treasure every word you share with us. Seung-woo took another bite without meaning to. his brain struggling to process what his taste buds already understood. The mac and cheese was ridiculous. Creamy without being heavy, sharp cheese balanced by subtle heat, comfort food elevated into something that demanded attention. The gochugaru didn't dominate. It wove through the dish like a thread of fire connecting two worlds he'd been taught could never touch. My grandmother made the base recipe, Aaliyah said, watching him with those knowing eyes. Taught me when I was 8 years old, standing on a stool in her kitchen in Birmingham. 3 cheeses minimum, always real butter, and enough love that you can taste it. She paused. I added the gochugaru after I'd been in Seoul for 2 years. After I finally stopped trying to keep my cultures in separate boxes. He set down his fork, but the flavors lingered, accusing him. Why are you telling me this? Because food is honest in ways people aren't. She took a bite herself, closing her eyes briefly in satisfaction. You can hate me all you want, but your tongue just told you something your brain refuses to accept. That combination works. That fusion creates something better than either ingredient alone. It's just food. Nothing is just food. Aaliyah's voice carried the weight of someone who'd built her life around that truth. Food is history, memory, identity. When you eat my grandmother's recipe with Korean pepper flakes, you're tasting what happens when cultures meet with respect instead of fear. Seung-woo felt defensive walls slamming back into place. One dish doesn't prove anything. Then why do you look so uncomfortable? She leaned back, studying him like he was a puzzle she was solving in real time. You've been taught your whole life that mixing cultures dilutes them, makes them less than. But you just tasted proof that's a lie, and it's terrifying you. He wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that one decent meal didn't dismantle decades of his father's wisdom. But the words stuck in his throat because she was right. He was terrified. Not of her specifically, but of what she represented, a world where his father's teachings crumbled like sand under scrutiny. The server appeared with their appetizers, setting down elaborately plated dishes that looked like abstract art. Seung-woo had ordered them without thinking, expensive items meant to demonstrate his status, his belonging in spaces like this. Aaliyah thanked the server in polite Korean and examined the food with genuine interest rather than the performative appreciation he'd expected. Your grandmother comes to my restaurant twice a week, Aaliyah said, picking up her chopsticks. Always orders the same thing. Gochujang collard greens and cornbread made with rice flour. You know what she told me the first time she tried them. Seung-woo said nothing, his jaw tight. She said they reminded her of her own grandmother's cooking. Not the flavors exactly, but the feeling. The way food can make you feel held, even when you're alone. Aaliyah took a bite of some molecular gastronomy creation that probably cost a week of most people's salaries. She's been testing me for 6 months. Watching how I handle difficult customers, racist comments, the 1,000 small cuts this city deals to people who look like me. And apparently, I passed whatever test she was running. She had no right to involve you in our family business. Maybe not. Aaliyah shrugged. But she loves you enough to risk your anger. She believes there's someone worth saving underneath all that expensive hatred. I don't need saving. Everyone needs saving from something. Her eyes held his, unflinching. Your father convinced you that isolation equals strength. That purity equals power. But you're 35 years old, sitting in an empty restaurant you rented out because you can't bear to be seen with me. That's not strength. That's loneliness dressed up in Armani. The accuracy of that statement hit him like a physical blow. Seung-woo had spent years building an empire and walls in equal measure. He had associates, not friends. Employees, not companions. His penthouse was full of expensive things and empty of anything that mattered. You don't know anything about my life. I know what isolation looks like. I've lived it. Aaliyah's voice softened slightly, and for the first time, he glimpsed something vulnerable beneath her armor. When I first came to Seoul, I was so lonely I thought it would kill me. Different language, different culture, people staring at me everywhere I went. I could have built walls. Could have decided Koreans were all racist and gone home bitter. Why didn't you? Because I'm stubborn. Because I fell in love with kimchi jjigae and the way Nam-san looks at sunrise, and the ajumma at the market who taught me how to pick the best gochugaru even though she thought I was crazy. Aaliyah smiled, and it transformed her face. I chose connection over fear. And yeah, people still stare. Still make assumptions. Still treat me like a curiosity instead of a person sometimes. But I built something beautiful anyway. Seung-woo found himself taking another bite of the mac and cheese, letting the flavors ground him while his worldview tilted on its axis. Everything his father had taught him said this woman should be lesser, should be someone he dismissed without thought. But she sat across from him radiating competence and dignity, speaking his language, wearing his culture mixed with hers like a declaration of war against small-mindedness. My father said that mixing bloodlines weakens both, he said quietly, the words tasting like confession. That Korean culture survived because we stayed pure. That outsiders especially. He stopped, unable to finish. Especially black people, Aaliyah finished for him, her voice gentle but firm. Because we're at the bottom of his racial hierarchy. Because if you can hate us, you can feel superior to someone. He wasn't wrong about everything. No. Probably not. She pushed the Tupperware closer to him. But he was wrong about this. About me. About the idea that different means lesser. She paused. Taste it again. Really taste it. Not just the food, but what it represents. Seung-woo looked at the container, at the humble Tupperware that had no place in a restaurant like this but somehow belonged anyway because she'd brought it. His hand moved almost against his will, taking another portion. This time he paid attention, to the way the smoky Gouda complemented the sharp cheddar, to the way the gochugaru added depth without overwhelming, to the perfect texture that spoke of someone who'd made this dish hundreds of times until it became an extension of themselves. It was perfect. Undeniably, uncomfortably perfect. Your father was wrong, Aaliyah said softly, watching recognition dawn across his face. Not about everything. Not about Korean culture being valuable or history mattering. But about this. About the idea that mixing makes things weaker instead of stronger. Seung-woo set down his fork, his hands unsteady. Something fundamental was shifting inside him, like tectonic plates grinding against each other before an earthquake. His father's voice, so certain and absolute for 35 years, suddenly sounded hollow. Scared. Like a man who'd built his identity on being better than others because he'd never figured out how to be good enough on his own. I don't know how to, he stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. How to let go. How to admit he'd been wrong. How to exist in a world where his father's teachings were lies. You don't have to know right now. Aaliyah's expression held something that might have been compassion. You just have to be willing to consider the possibility that your father's fear doesn't have to be your prison. The server returned to clear their appetizers, and the interruption gave Seung-woo time to rebuild some of his shattered composure. But when he looked back at Aaliyah, at this impossible woman who'd walked into his life carrying Tupperware and truth, he couldn't quite manage to resurrect the contempt he'd worn like armor. She smiled, knowing and patient. There's hope for you yet, Park Seung-woo. He didn't answer, but for the first time in his adult life, he wondered if she might be right. The main course arrived in a choreographed silence, the server moving with the cautious precision of someone who sensed the emotional minefield they were navigating. Seung-woo was reaching for his wine glass, his mind still churning through uncomfortable revelations about mac and cheese and his father's lies, when the restaurant's carefully cultivated atmosphere shattered like dropped crystal. The doors to the private dining room slammed open hard enough to bounce off the walls. 6 men in dark suits poured through the entrance with the casual violence of people who'd never been told no in their lives. Seung-woo's bodyguards materialized from their positions near the windows and the hallway, hands moving toward concealed weapons, but he raised one hand in a signal that stopped them cold. He knew that walk. That particular brand of arrogance. Lee Jae-hyun stepped through his men like a king through his court, his suit custom-tailored to show off a gym-sculpted body, his hair slicked back with enough product to be flammable. He had the face of someone who'd been handsome before cruelty reshaped it into something harder, meaner. Tattoos crept up from his collar, dragons and tigers fighting for dominance on his neck. Park Seung-woo. Jae-hyun's voice carried across the room with mocking familiarity. I heard you were having dinner. Thought I'd join you. Seung-woo stood slowly, his expression settling into the cold mask he wore for territorial disputes. This is a private event, Jae-hyun. You weren't invited. Private. Jae-hyun's eyes swept the room, landing on Aaliyah with predatory interest. His smile widened into something ugly. That's not very private. In fact, I'd say you're being downright social. Aaliyah remained seated, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp, tracking the threat with the awareness of someone who'd learned to read danger early and well. She didn't look afraid. She looked calculating. Who's your little friend? Jae-hyun moved closer, his men fanning out in a practiced formation that spoke of too many fights in too many places. I didn't know you were into exotic pets these days, Seung-woo. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Seung-woo felt something primal and violent surge in his chest, but he kept his voice level. Leave. Now. Or what? Jae-hyun laughed, the sound grating. You'll call your grandmother? I heard she's the one really running things these days. Making you play nice with foreigners, setting up little dates. He turned his full attention to Aaliyah, looking her up and down with deliberate disrespect. Tell me, sweetheart, does he pay you by the hour or is this a flat-rate situation? The silence that followed was absolute. Even Jae-hyun's own men shifted uncomfortably, sensing they'd crossed a line their boss was too arrogant to see. Aaliyah set down her chopsticks with deliberate care. Her expression remained neutral, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. I like to know who I'm talking to before I decide whether they're worth my time. Lee Jae-hyun. I run Busan. He leaned against their table uninvited, his proximity an invasion. And you are uninterested. Aaliyah's voice carried the kind of polite dismissal that cut deeper than insults. But thank you for introducing yourself. Now I know exactly who to describe to the police if you don't back up out of my personal space. Jae-hyun's smile twisted into something meaner. Police. In this room. He gestured at the assembled men, weapons poorly concealed, violence promised in every stance. Baby, the police don't exist where we exist. Don't call me baby. What should I call you then? Jae-hyun's hand moved toward her shoulder, and Seung-woo started forward, but Aaliyah was faster. Her hand caught Jae-hyun's wrist mid-reach with surprising strength, her grip tight enough to make him wince. You can call me the woman who's about to break your fingers if you touch me. Her voice remained calm, conversational. Or you can back up and rethink your life choices. Your call. Jae-hyun jerked his hand back, his face flushing with anger and embarrassment. "You've got spirit. I like that." He turned to Seung-woo, his voice dripping with false camaraderie. "Where'd you find her? I didn't know Seoul had this kind of entertainment." Entertainment. Aaliyah stood now, and despite being smaller than every man in the room, she somehow commanded it. "Is that what you think I am? What else would you be?" Jae-hyun's eyes raked over her again, lingering with deliberate obscenity. A black girl in a hanbok playing dress-up, sitting across from Seoul's biggest crime boss? You're either very expensive or very stupid. Seung-woo moved then, closing the distance between them in 3 strides. His voice came out quiet, deadly. "Choose your next words very carefully, Jae-hyun. Why? You actually care about this one?" Jae-hyun laughed, genuinely surprised. "I heard you hated." He stopped himself, but the damage was done. The unfinished sentence hung in the air like smoke. "Hated what?" Aaliyah asked, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Say it. Finish your sentence." Jae-hyun's smile turned vicious. "Fine. I heard Park Seung-woo wouldn't touch a black woman with a 10-foot pole. Something about keeping bloodlines pure, maintaining Korean dignity." He looked between them, delighted by the tension. "So imagine my surprise finding you too cozy in a private dining room. What changed, Seung-woo? Your standards or your desperation?" The words landed like grenades. Aaliyah's eyes flickered to Seung-woo, and he saw the question there, the confirmation of every ugly thing she'd already known, but hearing it from someone else made undeniable. "That's enough." Seung-woo's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Is it?" Jae-hyun stepped closer, emboldened by the chaos he was creating. "Because I'm just getting started. See, I've got a territorial dispute with you. You've been moving product through zones we agreed were neutral. Thought maybe I'd come settle that." He glanced at Aaliyah again. "But this is so much better. Finding you here, breaking bread with someone you supposedly can't stand. Your father must be spinning in his grave." Seung-woo felt his control fracturing. His hand moved toward the weapon he always carried, concealed perfectly against his ribs. But Aaliyah's voice stopped him cold. "Mr. Lee." She pronounced his name with perfect Korean formality, her tone ice over steel. "You walked in here to humiliate him, to settle scores and prove you're dangerous. But all you've actually proven is that you're the kind of man who derives power from degrading women." "Excuse me. You heard me." Aaliyah picked up her water glass, taking a sip like they were having tea. "You came in here calling me exotic, a pet, entertainment, making sexual innuendos because you think my blackness makes me less deserving of respect. You're not dangerous. You're just pathetic." Jae-hyun's face flushed dark red. "You want to see pathetic? I'll show you." "You'll show me what?" Aaliyah didn't raise her voice, but something in it made the entire room pause. "You'll prove you're exactly the small, insecure man I already know you are? You'll make racist comments and think that makes you powerful? Please." She set down her glass. "I've dealt with men like you my entire life. You're not special. You're not even original." The silence that followed was broken only by harsh breathing and the distant sound of Seoul traffic outside. Jae-hyun stared at Aaliyah like she'd slapped him, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. "Do you know who I am?" His voice rose, losing the calculated calm. "I could make you disappear. Make you wish you'd never stepped foot in this country. There it is." Aaliyah smiled, but it was all edges. The threat. The violence. "Because when men like you run out of arguments, You resort to force. It's predictable. Boring, actually. Jae-hyun lunged forward, and everything happened at once. Seung-woo moved to intercept, his bodyguards drew weapons, Jae-hyun's men responded in kind, and Aaliyah grabbed her Tupperware container and swung it in a perfect arc that connected with Jae-hyun's temple with a hollow thunk that echoed through the suddenly still room. The gangster stumbled sideways, stunned, his hand going to his head. He pulled it away, checking for blood, his expression cycling through shock, rage, and something that might have been respect. You hit me with Tupperware. It's all I had. Aaliyah held the container like a weapon, ready to swing again. Want to try for round 2, or are we done here? The room balanced on a knife's edge, violence promised in every held breath. The moment stretched like taffy, everyone frozen in tableau. Jae-hyun holding his head, Aaliyah gripping her Tupperware, weapons drawn but not yet fired, violence promised but not yet delivered. Then Jae-hyun started laughing, the sound unhinged and dangerous. This bitch just hit me with a food container. He looked at his men, incredulous. Did you see that? She actually. Call me a bitch again, Aaliyah interrupted, her voice dropping to something colder than Seung-woo had heard from her all night, and I'll show you what else I can do with household items. Jae-hyun's laughter died. He straightened, rolling his neck with deliberate menace. You've got courage, I'll give you that. Stupidity too, but courage. He stepped closer despite Seung-woo's warning growl. You know what happens to people who disrespect me? They probably get bored listening to you talk about yourself, Aaliyah shot back without missing a beat. Do you practice these tough guy speeches in the mirror, or do they just come naturally? One of Jae-hyun's men snickered before catching himself. The boss's face went dark. You think this is funny? You think you can walk into our world wearing your little costume, playing at being Korean, and nobody will check you? Jae-hyun's voice rose with each word. You're a foreigner. An outsider. You don't belong here, and the moment Park Seung-woo gets tired of whatever game he's playing, you'll disappear back to whatever country spawned you. Aaliyah set the Tupperware down on the table with deliberate calm and straightened to her full height. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of every microaggression she'd ever survived, every racist comment she'd absorbed and transformed into fuel. You're right. I am a foreigner. I came to this country with 2 suitcases and a dream that probably looked ridiculous to people like you. She took a step forward, and somehow Jae-hyun took a step back. But I learned the language. I studied the culture. I built a business that serves hundreds of people every week. I earned my place here through work and respect, not through intimidation and violence. You think running a restaurant makes you special? No. Being excellent makes me special. Aaliyah's eyes blazed. You're just another insecure man who mistakes fear for respect. You walk in here throwing your weight around, making sexual comments, trying to degrade me because deep down you know that I've built something real while you've just inherited someone else's cruelty. Jae-hyun's hand moved toward his jacket, but Aaliyah didn't flinch. Go ahead, she said quietly. Pull out whatever weapon makes you feel powerful. Prove that the only way you know how to deal with a woman who won't submit is through violence. Show everyone in this room exactly how small you really are. You don't know anything about me. I know everything about you. Aaliyah's voice turned surgical, cutting with precision. You're the kind of man who needs to humiliate others to feel whole, who can only feel big by making others feel small. You saw me sitting here with him and your first thought wasn't about business or territory. It was about finding someone weaker to dominate. But here's your problem. I'm not weaker. I'm just different. And that terrifies you. The room had gone absolutely silent. Even Seung-woo found himself holding his breath, watching this woman dismantle a rival gang boss with nothing but words and unflinching courage. Jae-hyun's face cycled through expressions: rage, disbelief, something that might have been shame, before settling on cold fury. "I'm done talking." He nodded to his largest bodyguard, a mountain of muscle with scarred knuckles and dead eyes. The man moved toward Aaliyah with the inexorable purpose of an avalanche. "Back up," Seung-woo commanded, stepping between them, but the bodyguard ignored him, focused entirely on Aaliyah. The man reached for her arm, and Aaliyah moved. The Tupperware container swung up in a perfect arc, catching the bodyguard under the chin with enough force to snap his head back. He stumbled, more from surprise than pain, and Aaliyah followed through with a kick to his knee that had clearly been learned in some self-defense class. The bodyguard went down hard, and chaos erupted. Jae-hyun's men surged forward. Seung-woo's bodyguards responded instantly, and suddenly the elegant dining room transformed into a battlefield. Seung-woo moved on instinct, years of street fights and survival overriding thought. He caught one of Jae-hyun's men with a punch that broke something in the man's face, then ducked a knife slash that would have opened his throat. But his eyes kept tracking back to Aaliyah. She'd grabbed a chair and was using it like a lion tamer, keeping two of Jae-hyun's men at bay while backing toward the window. Her fusion hanbok was torn at the shoulder, her perfectly styled hair coming loose, but her eyes remained fierce and focused. When one man got too close, she swung the chair with enough force to send him sprawling into a table, expensive dishware shattering like rain. Something primal and possessive surged through Seung-woo's chest. This woman, this impossible, infuriating woman who'd walked into his life hours ago, was fighting for her survival, and the thought of anyone touching her made him absolutely murderous. He moved through the chaos like a blade, taking down anyone who got close to her with brutal efficiency. A rival gangster went for Aaliyah's blind spot, and Seung-woo intercepted him with a knee to the ribs that lifted the man off his feet. Another tried to grab her from behind, and Seung-woo caught his arm, twisting until bones cracked and the man screamed. "Get to the door," he shouted at Aaliyah, but she shook her head. "Not without my Tupperware. Are you insane? It has sentimental value." She dove under a swinging fist, grabbed the container from the floor, and came up swinging at a bodyguard's face. The man reeled back, clutching his bleeding nose. Seung-woo would have laughed if he wasn't so busy keeping her alive. He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the exit while his own men created a corridor of violence through Jae-hyun's crew. Behind them, Jae-hyun was shouting orders, his face purple with rage. "This isn't over, Park. You hear me? This isn't over." Seung-woo didn't bother responding. He pulled Aaliyah through the doorway, down the hallway, past the shocked restaurant staff who'd wisely locked themselves in the kitchen. His driver had the car running, the back door already open. They dove inside, and the vehicle peeled away from the curb before the door even closed. In the sudden silence of the moving car, Seung-woo and Aaliyah stared at each other, both breathing hard, adrenaline still flooding their systems. Her hanbok was ruined, torn and stained. His suit jacket was gone, his shirt ripped at the shoulder. Blood dripped from a cut above his eyebrow he didn't remember receiving. And she was still holding that damn Tupperware container. "You went back for food storage," he said incredulously. "My grandmother gave me this container." Aaliyah was checking it for cracks with genuine concern. "It survived 20 years and 3 continents. I'm not losing it to some gangster with an inferiority complex." Despite everything, the violence, the danger, the complete disaster of the evening, Seung-woo laughed. Actually laughed, the sound startling in its genuineness. Aaliyah looked at him like he'd lost his mind, which made him laugh harder. "What's funny? You are. This is." He gestured at both of them, disheveled and bleeding and clutching Tupperware like a treasure. I was supposed to hate you. I was supposed to sit through one dinner and collect my inheritance and never think about you again. And now. Seung-woo met her eyes, and the truth hit him like a freight train. He'd been ready to kill for her. Had killed, or close enough. The moment Jaehyun's men moved toward her, every instinct Seung-woo possessed had screamed mine, protect, defend. Not because of strategy or obligation, but because somewhere between the mac and cheese and the Tupperware assault, this woman had become someone worth fighting for. Now I don't know anything anymore, he admitted quietly. Aaliyah studied his face, then nodded slowly. That's a start. The car merged into Seoul's nighttime traffic, carrying them away from the chaos and toward whatever came next. Seung-woo's penthouse sat on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Gangnam, all sharp angles and expensive emptiness. The living room stretched out in monochrome perfection. White marble, black leather, chrome fixtures that reflected nothing warm. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed Seoul like a possession, the city lights glittering beneath them like conquered territory. Aaliyah walked in and stopped, taking in the sterile space with an expression that made Seung-woo suddenly defensive. What? This is where you live. She turned slowly, her torn hanbok incongruous against the severe modernism. It looks like a hotel room. Like nobody actually exists here. It's minimalist. It's sad. She walked to the kitchen, which was clearly decorative rather than functional, all stainless steel and surfaces so clean they'd probably never seen food. When's the last time you cooked in here? I have people for that. Of course you do. Aaliyah opened the refrigerator and made a sound of disgust. Bottled water and expired takeout. This is worse than I thought. She turned to face him, her expression shifting from judgment to determination. Where's the nearest convenience store? Why? Because I'm going to cook, and you're going to talk, and we're going to figure out what the hell just happened tonight. She crossed her arms, still holding that ridiculous Tupperware. Unless you'd prefer I leave right now and we both pretend this never occurred. Seung-woo wanted to say yes. Wanted to send her away, call his grandmother and lie about the date, retreat into his carefully constructed isolation. But the adrenaline was fading, leaving behind something raw and uncomfortable that he didn't have a name for. There's a GS-25 2 blocks north, he heard himself say. Aaliyah nodded once, then looked down at her ruined hanbok. I need something else to wear. This cost me 300,000 won and now it's destroyed. Seung-woo disappeared into his bedroom and returned with a black t-shirt and sweatpants that would be enormous on her. Aaliyah took them without comment and vanished into the bathroom. When she emerged 5 minutes later, her braids pulled back, her face washed clean of the evening's chaos, wearing his clothes like armor, something in Seung-woo's chest constricted painfully. She looked real. Human. Present in a way nothing in his apartment ever had. I'm going to the store, she announced. You're going to take a shower and stop bleeding on your expensive floors. When I get back, we're having a conversation you've been avoiding your entire adult life. You're very bossy for someone who was supposed to be a blind date. You're very compliant for a crime boss. She grabbed his wallet from the counter without asking. I'm charging this to you. Consider it hazard pay. The door closed behind her, and Seung-woo stood alone in his silent penthouse, wondering when exactly he'd lost control of his own life. He showered mechanically, the hot water stinging the cuts and bruises he'd accumulated. In the mirror, he looked like someone who'd been in a war. Maybe he had been. Maybe he still was. When Aaliyah returned, arms full of grocery bags, she moved through his kitchen with the confidence of someone who'd cooked in far worse conditions. She pulled out eggs, vegetables, instant rice, gochugaru, sesame oil. Within minutes, the sterile space filled with sounds and smells that made the apartment feel inhabited for the first time since he'd bought it. "Sit," she commanded, pointing at the breakfast bar. Seung-woo sat. She cooked in silence, her movements economical and sure, and he watched her transform his lifeless kitchen into something that felt dangerously close to home. When she placed a bowl in front of him, bibimbap thrown together from convenience store ingredients but somehow perfect, he stared at it like it might contain answers. "Eat," Aaliyah said, sitting across from him with her own bowl. "Then talk." He took a bite because refusing felt impossible. The food was simple, honest, exactly what his body needed after the violence and adrenaline. They ate in silence, and Seung-woo felt the walls he'd spent decades building start to crumble under the weight of everything unspoken. "Why?" Aaliyah asked finally, setting down her chopsticks. Not the surface answer. Not the one about purity or culture or bloodlines. The real reason. "Why do you hate people who look like me?" Seung-woo's hands curled into fists on the counter. "I don't." "Yes, you do. Or you did. Maybe you still do. I need to know why." The words stuck in his throat, decades of conditioning making them almost impossible to speak. But something about the way she looked at him, not with judgment but with a patient expectation of truth, made them come loose. "My father died when I was 16, he began, his voice rough. "Killed by a rival gang in Busan. Before he died, he made me promise to protect our legacy. To keep our bloodline pure, our organization Korean, our power untainted by outsiders." He looked at his hands, remembering his father's blood on them. He said weakness comes from mixing. That the moment you let foreigners in, you lose everything that makes you strong. And you believed him. He was my father. He was dying. What else was I supposed to do? Seung-woo's voice cracked. "I was 16 years old and terrified, and he made me promise. So I built my entire life around that promise. I made rules. Never trust outsiders. Never show weakness. Never let anyone close enough to make me question what he taught me." Aaliyah listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. "And then my grandmother threatened everything. And you walked in wearing that hanbok and carrying that container and speaking my language like you belonged here." He laughed bitterly. "You were supposed to be easy to dismiss. You were supposed to prove my father right, that outsiders were lesser, that black women were everything he said they were. But I didn't." "No, you didn't." Seung-woo met her eyes, and the truth felt like drowning. "You were brilliant and brave and so completely yourself that every single thing my father taught me started falling apart. And that terrifies me more than any rival gang ever could." "Why?" "Because if he was wrong about you, he might have been wrong about everything." The words came out in a rush now, 20 years of certainty crumbling. If mixing cultures creates something beautiful instead of weak, if outsiders can understand us better than we understand ourselves, if a black woman can walk into my world and show more strength than I've ever had, what does that make me? What does that make the life I've built on his lies? Aaliyah reached across the counter and took his hand, her touch warm and solid and real. "It makes you human. It makes you someone who loved his father enough to honor a dying wish, even when that wish was poisoned. It makes you someone who can choose differently now." "I don't know how to choose differently." "You already did." She squeezed his hand. "You fought for me tonight. You could have walked away when Jae-hyun showed up, could have let his men take me, could have preserved your reputation and your inheritance. But you didn't." Seung-woo thought about the moment he'd seen that bodyguard reach for her, the way something primal had roared to life in his chest. "I would have killed them. All of them. If they'd hurt you. I know. Aaliyah's smile was sad and knowing. That's what scares you. Not that you hate me, but that you don't. That somewhere between the mac and cheese and the Tupperware assault, you started caring about someone your father taught you to despise. The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. He'd been ready to kill for her. Ready to die for her. This woman he'd met hours ago had somehow become more important than decades of his father's teachings. I don't know what to do with this, he confessed quietly. You don't have to know right now. Aaliyah stood, pulling him to his feet. But you have to decide something. Are you going to let a dead man's hate keep you from living? Are you going to spend the rest of your life honoring a promise made by a scared 16-year-old boy? Or are you going to choose who you want to be now? Seung-woo looked at her, at this woman who'd walked into his life and demolished everything he thought he knew. His phone sat on the counter, and he picked it up with shaking hands. His grandmother answered on the first ring. Well, you were right, he said, his voice breaking on the words. You were right about everything. About father, about his poison, about me. He looked at Aaliyah, who watched him with those knowing eyes. She's transforming everything. And I don't know if I'm strong enough for what that means. You are, his grandmother said softly. You always were. You just needed someone brave enough to show you. He ended the call and stood there in his sterile kitchen that Aaliyah had filled with warmth and life, wondering who Park Seung-woo would be without his father's hate to define him. Aaliyah smiled. That's a start. But the real question is this. When hatred becomes inheritance, when fear disguises itself as tradition, when the walls we build to protect ourselves become the prison that destroys us, do we have the courage to tear them down? Even when it means betraying everything our fathers taught us, even when choosing love feels like choosing treason against our own blood. Seung-woo's moment wasn't just about accepting a black woman into his world. It was about rejecting the poison passed down as legacy, the prejudice masked as purity, the isolation he mistook for strength. He chose transformation anyway. And maybe the harder question is, would we? Have you ever been raised to believe something so deeply that questioning it felt like losing yourself? Where staying loyal to inherited hate felt safer than risking the unknown territory of connection? Have you ever met someone who shattered everything you thought you knew about the world, about people different from you, about who you were supposed to be? Tell us, honestly. Have you ever had to choose between honoring a dying parent's wishes and honoring your own truth? Between preserving tradition and embracing evolution? Between the comfortable lie and the uncomfortable liberation? Share your story in the comments below. Someone reading your words might find the permission they've been waiting for to choose differently. Stories like this remind us that transformation is never comfortable, but stagnation is death by another name. That sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit our fathers were wrong. That love, real, transformative, boundary-crossing love, requires us to become someone our ancestors might not recognize. And if this video stirred something in you, if it made you examine the prejudices you inherited, the walls you've built, or the person you could become if you chose courage over comfort, please remember to like this video, share it with someone still imprisoned by their father's fear, and subscribe so you never miss the stories that challenge us to become better than we were raised to be. Thank you for staying to the very end of this journey. May your days be filled with the courage to question, your nights peaceful with honest reflection, and your choices guided by love stronger than inherited hate. Goodbye, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video of transformation.